10-year-old Betty Lou Zukowski lived in Hampton County, Massachusetts in 1966 with her parents, Stanley and Mildred Zukowski. At approximately 6 p.m. on May 26 of 1966, Betty Lou left her family home on Front Street in Chicopee right after taking a phone call from someone she told her mom was one of her girlfriends. That would be the last time Betty Lou's family saw her alive. When she failed to return home, her parents called the Chicopee Police Department and reported their daughter missing. The police department put out an all-states alarm in an effort to find the young girl. Tragically, 4 days later on Memorial Day, May 30th of 1966, Betty Lou's beat 4'7", 75-pound body was found just offshore by young boys fishing in the Westfield River in West Springfield. The area of the river where the body was discovered ran just next to Robinson State Park in Hampton County, Massachusetts. Following the discovery of Betty Lou's body, the West Springfield Police Department and the Chicopee Police Department opened a joint investigation, with both agencies assigning their entire detective bureaus to the case. During an autopsy, the Office of the Medical Examiner determined that Betty Lou had multiple blunt force injuries to her head, a skull fracture, and she drowned. The detectives interviewed family, friends, and classmates to determine who Betty Lou may have met up with at the time of her disappearance. Investigators believed Betty Lou knew the person who took her life. Otherwise, she would not have left her home after receiving the phone call. They theorized that she met up with this person and ended up in West Springfield after riding in a vehicle operated by someone she knew. Approximately a week after Betty Lou's body was recovered, investigators were able to develop a composite sketch from 2 witnesses, one of whom investigators believed to be the last person to have seen Betty Lou alive in the mid-evening hours of the night she went missing. The sketch resulted in numerous investigative tips, but authorities were unable to identify Betty Lou's assailant before the case went cold. Recently, the District Attorney's Unresolved Cases Unit picked up the case and learned that information from multiple sources was provided to the West Springfield Police Department in 1977 that linked Donald Mars to the crime. Additional interviews were conducted, culminating in the case being presented to a grand jury. The DA's office did not disclose what information linked Mars to the case, or if any new physical evidence came to light prior to the case presented to the grand jury. Mars, who was 17 years old when Betty Lou's life was taken, appeared before a judge in Hampton County Superior Court on November 3 of 2022 for his arraignment. He is currently being held without bond and is expected to appear in court again in May of 2023. Hampton District Attorney Anthony Gelini said in a statement, "Sadly, Betty Lou's parents are deceased and will not see Donald Mars answered for what we allege he did to their daughter. My office has been in contact with Betty Lou's extended family members, one of whom was a pallbearer at her funeral in 1966. While this investigation will not bring Betty Lou back to her family or grant her the opportunity to grow into a healthy adult that she and every child deserves, it is for them and for Betty Lou that we embark upon this journey of seeking justice. Mars has a long criminal history of doing horrible things to children. He is listed as a Level 3 offender, meaning he is considered to have the highest risk of reoffending and poses a high degree of danger to the public." On May 22, 2019, deputies from the San Jacinto County Sheriff's Office in Texas were dispatched to a deeply wooded area of the Sam Houston National Forest after receiving a 911 call regarding a deceased adult female discovered there. The female was identified as 59-year-old Rhonda Richardson. She was a corrections officer with the Polunsky Unit of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice at the time. Rhonda lived very close to the area where her body was found. She was found face down and she was scalped. San Jacinto County Sheriff's Office Sergeant Gary Sharpen said that a set of ATV tire track impressions were found next to the body. He also said it was strange for Rhonda to be in the woods because she was afraid of the woods, particularly snakes and other animals. Gary Sharpen was involved in creating a timeline of events leading up to her body being discovered. He said the day before, Rhonda's dogs had run off into the national forest. She then went around asking some of her neighbors to help her look for the dogs. One of the people that volunteered to help was her neighbor, Robert Dale Clary. Several witnesses told investigators that Clary was the last person seen with Rhonda. Clary was also the person who found Rhonda's body, according to Sergeant Gary Sharpen. Instead of calling 911 to report finding his neighbor's body, Clary went and spoke with several family members about the discovery. He never even called 911. He didn't stop and call authorities. He didn't do anything, Sharpen said. I mean, just that alone was really odd and bizarre. In addition to not calling the police, Clary's behavior also included him returning to the area where he found Rhonda's body and taking several photographs and bringing his nephew to the body and telling him to call 911. Authorities believed Clary was responsible, but unfortunately lacked sufficient evidence for an arrest. Sharpen says in recent years investigators were able to obtain new information. Cell phone technology placed Clary and Rhonda both on the trail where she was found when Rhonda's phone showed she stopped moving. An additional witness also came forward and provided critical information for investigators. We happened across a witness in this case that we knew was out there, but we had never been able to identify or locate. We happened across this witness, and it really was just the last piece of the puzzle we needed to get a warrant. This all led to 65-year-old Robert Dale Clary being arrested in November of 2022 for taking Rhonda's life and dumping her body in the woods, and served time behind bars after being convicted on 3 separate driving while intoxicated charges. He is currently being held in the San Jacinto jail on a $750,000 bond. At about 10 p.m. on January 19th of 2013, someone called 911 about gunshots at the Crescent Landing apartment complex in Greenville County, South Carolina. Deputies found the body of 47-year-old Edward Goldsmith in the parking lot of the apartment complex on Whitehorse Road. Unfortunately for investigators, witnesses were not helpful and there wasn't much to go on, so the case went cold. Then in March of 2022, 2 brothers were arrested and charged with taking the life of Edward. The names are Blesius Dravius McKinney and Deontay John Mel McKinney. Greenville County Sheriff Hobart Lewis said the brothers lured Edward to the apartment complex because they felt that they were ripped off during a drug deal. Hobart Lewis said the advancement in technology helped solve this cold case. Utilizing the various technological advancements, our cold case unit was able to piece together critical evidence that, along with new witness testimony, allowed them to identify the McKinney brothers as the responsible parties. The brothers are currently in the Greenville County Detention Center in the Kershaw Prison, respectively. Greenville County Sheriff's Office currently has 92 cold cases. Lewis said the cold case unit has solved 6 cold cases since its inception. In August of 2020, 26-year-old Alexis Jean Lopez lived in Oxnard, California in 2017. She grew up in Santa Paula and Camarillo and graduated from Camarillo High School. On October 8th of 2017, at 9:45 p.m., Alexis was in the driver's seat of a Chevrolet Silverado pickup truck waiting to turn left from Ventura Boulevard onto Santa Clara Avenue. A 27-year-old Oxnard man was sitting next to her while they waited in the left turn pocket for the light to change. Alexis and the man were then both shot multiple times in a drive-by shooting as they sat in the truck. Alexis was fatally shot, but her passenger was hospitalized and survived. Alexis left behind 2 young children, according to Sergeant Edgar Fernandez, who worked on the case. Fernandez said that he and others consistently worked on the case over the years where new information would come in slowly and keep them going in the right direction. A recent addition of the new evidence led police to arrest Jacob Jamal Steyer, 25, of Oxnard in October of 2022. Steyer had already been in custody since September of 2022 for violating his post-release supervision from a prior assault conviction. Appeared in Ventura County Superior Court on October 24th of 2022 for arraignment on the charges against him. He did not enter a plea and is due to return to court November 21st. He was rebooked into custody and remains at Todd Road Jail in lieu of a $1 million bail. The police investigation is still ongoing. Fernandez said they expect to make at least 1 additional arrest. At 805-200-5669. The city of Oxnard offers a $25,000 reward for information that leads to an arrest and conviction in this case. Fernandez said that the shooter and the victims did not know each other. He believed the motive was more than likely a case of mistaken identity rather than a random act of violence. In June of 2007, a call was made to the Lewisburg Police Department about 53-year-old James Johansen going missing in Greenbrier County, West Virginia. His friends, family members, and neighbors got concerned when no one had seen or heard from him for a period of time. After an extensive investigation by numerous West Virginia state troopers over the next 14 years, a break in the case evolved. The Greenbrier County Sheriff's Office received a call in September of 2021 of skeletal remains located near Muddy Creek Mountain in Greenbrier County. The Greenbrier County Sheriff's Office crime scene team, along with members of the West Virginia State Police Lewisburg Detachment, collected the remains and other evidence at the crime scene. The Greenbrier County Sheriff's Office completed a crime scene report and eventually discovered the remains belonged to James Johansen. They continued the investigation based on the discovery of his body in the previous investigative report. After investigating new and old leads, troopers presented Greenbrier County Prosecutor Pat Villa with an investigative report. Based on the report, Villa decided to present the investigation to Greenbrier County Grand Jury in October of 2022, resulting in an indictment on Charles Michael Cason Kessinger. West Virginia state troopers traveled to San Antonio, Texas in October of 2022, where Kessinger was arrested at his home by the Texas Rangers and Texas Department of Public Safety. Kessinger was extradited back to West Virginia by members of the West Virginia State Police and is currently being housed in Southern Regional Jail. Investigators have released that the motive for Kessinger taking James's life was robbery, is responsible. Archie Rutherford lived in Spokane, Washington in 1982 with his wife Eleanor. On May 25 of 1982, Eleanor returned from a weekend trip she took to the Seattle area. She expected her husband to pick her up from the airport, but he never showed up. A friend brought her home, and that's when she noticed her green Honda, 1979, was gone. When she went inside, she found whiskey bottles in the front room and bloody knives in the dining room. She then discovered Archie's body in the bedroom. An autopsy determined he suffered multiple injuries, including several stab wounds to his neck. Blood covered his head and neck. It was also found on the bedding and walls. A detective noticed some cuts on the back of Archie's left fingers and forearm, which could have been defensive wounds. A portable television rested against his face with a cord wrapped around his neck. Pieces of a broken glass decanter, which police believe was broken over Rutherford, were visible near his head and back. Police found a piece of a cast iron pan under his body and another piece on the floor of the bedroom. Eleanor Rutherford discovered a cast iron pan on the stove that was damaged and missing part of its sidewall. She also noticed blood and hair on the pan, which a detective collected as evidence. Spokane County Coroner Lois Shanks stated that Archie was likely knocked unconscious by a blow to the head before he was repeatedly stabbed to the left side of his head and neck. She said he was likely asleep when the attack started. In a walkthrough of the home with police, Eleanor Rutherford noticed stolen items including the Honda, keys to the house and car, her husband's wallet, which included credit cards, and a 19-inch color television set. She told police other items were out of place in the house. She said steak knives were found on the dining room table instead of in the kitchen drawer. The glass liquor decanter scattered in pieces around her husband's body was typically in the hallway. Cigarette butts and ash were dumped in the toilet, and her jewelry boxes were rummaged through in her bedroom. Police wrote in documents the stolen items demonstrate robbery that was a potential motive. They said the amount of excessive violence used indicated a level of rage more commonly found in domestic violence situations. Eleanor's Honda was found by an officer about 8 hours after she called the police to report that she found Archie's body. Investigators lifted fingerprints from the car that belonged to an unknown man, but the A resident and manager at the Myrtle Apartments, which adjoins the lot where the Honda was found, told the police they first noticed the car in the lot between 6:30 and 7 a.m. of May 25th. Police determined Archie brought the Honda in for repairs on May 24th to Pontiac City, the current home of Finley Lexus of Spokane, on West 3rd Avenue. The car was retrieved before noon the same day. A friend of Archie told police he had breakfast with him at the Shack restaurant, about 3 blocks west of Pontiac City, while the Honda was being serviced. The friend saw Archie again around 9:05 p.m. at his work, the Tradewinds Motel. The last sighting of Archie may have been by a Spokane police officer who believed to have seen him driving the car around 11:30 p.m., May 24th by the Myrtle Apartments. DNA from the crime scene was collected that belonged to the culprit. It was blood found in the kitchen of the Rutherfords. Spokane detectives took a new look at the evidence in 2022. The Washington State Patrol Crime Lab tested DNA from the crime scene in February and got results back in June. A match report confirmed the blood found in the kitchen belonged to Tracy Pruitt. One set of fingerprints found on Eleanor's stolen Honda also matched Pruitt's. His name came up in this investigation even before the DNA match of this year. In 1982, his name first came up as a result of an investigation into unauthorized use of Archie's stolen credit cards. 62-year-old Tracy Pruitt was arrested in Los Angeles in November of 2022 and charged with taking Archie Rutherford's life. Investigators found that Pruitt was arrested in Ohio for an assault and robbery charge in 1982. He was convicted for those crimes and spent 27 years behind bars. Pruitt would have been 22 years old at the time he ended Archie's life. Investigators believed this was a random crime because they found no evidence that the two knew each other. Additionally, Pruitt's name never came up in interviews with Rutherford's co-workers or friends. Pruitt remains in custody in California awaiting extradition. His extradition process may take several months to determine if and when the state of California will relinquish custody of Pruitt to the state of Washington. 45-year-old Michael C. Schumeister lived in St. Petersburg, Florida. On the evening of August 14th of 1997, Michael's body was found outside of Mirror Lake Library roughly half a mile from his home. He was lying on his back and his pockets had been turned inside out. Investigators later learned that he had been paid and cashed his check earlier that same day, hinting heavily at robbery as being the motive. The medical examiner's report determined that Michael suffered blunt force trauma to the head and neck. Patricia Morris, who was 47 years old at the time, was identified as a person of interest early on. Investigators learned that Michael and Morris were drinking together at a bar the evening before. Morris later spoke with a detective and confirmed that she and Michael had been drinking together and that they both left in a taxi together. But she told police the two eventually parted ways and both were dropped off at separate places by the taxi driver later that night. Morris passed away on September 19th of 2010 in Hillsborough County, Florida. Then in 2016, investigators took another look into the case, finding that Morris had an extensive criminal history, including battery on law enforcement officers and various drug charges. In late March of 2022, the St. Petersburg Police Department Cold Case Unit took Michael Schumeister's pants out of property and evidence storage and tested the reversed pockets at the Pinellas County Forensics Lab for DNA reevaluation. On November 2nd of 2022, detectives received a response from the combined DNA index system belonged to Patricia Morris. The St. Petersburg Police Department said in a November 18, 2022 press release that the case is now considered closed since the offender is no longer alive. Our cold case detectives dedicate their time and experience to taking a fresh look at unsolved cases, the St. Petersburg Police Department said. With advances in technology and new information, they can bring justice for victims and closure to their families. Based on the recent DNA evidence and prior investigations, this case is now considered closed with the offender not being alive. Michael Schumeister's family members have been informed that the case has been closed. On November 28th of 2001, officers with the Newport Richey Police Department in Florida responded to a 911 call at a home located in the 4700 block of Sanctuary Drive. Upon arriving at the scene, investigators discovered the lifeless body of an adult male inside of the room of an apartment that was under construction. The man was identified as Simon Clark. An autopsy performed by the medical examiner's office determined that Simon suffered multiple blunt force trauma injuries to the face and chest, and that someone had taken his life. Detectives at the time conducted several interviews with potential witnesses and identified a person of interest, but did not tell the public who that person was. The weapon was located. However, the processing of the object did not reveal any leads. No arrests were made, and the case went cold until 2004. In May of 2016, Simon Clark's case was reopened. Investigators re-interviewed multiple witnesses who provided additional details on their recollection of events surrounding the crime. An additional witness who was present during the crime was also identified. The man is Jason Azevedo. Azevedo approached investigators and said that he was present when a man fatally struck Simon Clark with a bat. He named the man as Randy Petersilge. Azevedo further told investigators that he would participate in the prosecution of Petersilge because he had been living with the memories of the incident since its occurrence. Azevedo claimed that he was initially afraid to come forward because Petersilge forced him also to hit Simon Clark with the bat. Another witness, Denise Sanders, corroborated Azevedo's story. Sanders said that she spoke with Petersilge after the crime and said that he confessed. She further claimed that Azevedo wouldn't be able to testify against Randy Petersilge because he made Jason Azevedo strike him with the bat as well. Sanders was the general contractor hired to perform construction on the home of Simon Clark's friend and business partner in 2001 and Petersilge's boyfriend. After a few months, an engineer informed Clark's friend that Sanders had charged him more than $300,000 for approximately $120,000 worth of work. Clark's friend was in England at the time and asked Clark to inform Sanders that she would not be receiving any additional funds. When Sanders informed Petersilge that no more money was going to be paid, he allegedly went into the residence with Azevedo carrying a baseball bat and beat Simon Clark. Investigators say they discovered that Sanders was defrauding Clark's friend using the money to purchase narcotics, noting that both Petersilge and Azevedo had a history of drug-related offenses. Detectives said that Clark's friend's refusal to pay additional money was Petersilge's motive. Armed with the testimony of the new witness, the case was brought to the Pasco County State Attorney's Office. Prosecutors in 2018 presented the case to a grand jury, which subsequently returned an indictment against Petersilge and charged him with taking Simon Clark's life. Petersilge pleaded not guilty. The case went to trial in November of 2022. The jury then convicted Randy Petersilge. He will soon be sentenced. Believe it or not, this is not the first crime Petersilge has committed. In 2015, he was convicted on the charge of being a felon in possession of a firearm and was ordered to serve 42 months in federal prison. 19-year-old Cheryl Thompson lived in Cincinnati, Ohio in 1978. She was a freshman at the University of Cincinnati. On March 24 of 1978, Cheryl left her home to meet her boyfriend at a disco, but never arrived there. 2 weeks later, on April 8, her body was found by a state wildlife official on the bank of the Little Miami River in Loveland, Ohio. She had been strangled and assaulted. Cheryl was not the only one. From October 1976 to April 1978, at least 4 young women, 3 of them teenagers, suffered the same fate as Cheryl, all in the Cincinnati area. The crimes terrorized the region. They were not solved. All investigators could do was collect male DNA from Cheryl's body and wait for DNA technology to get more advanced. In 2022, when investigators took a new look at the case, they sent the male DNA sample to a private genealogy company in hopes of identifying a suspect. The results pointed to a specific family tree. One of the men in the family was Ralph Howell. He was a long-haul truck driver and newspaper delivery man for the Cincinnati Enquirer. Howell lost his life in his mid-30s in a car accident in 1985. When investigators took a closer look at Ralph Howell, they discovered that he had been arrested in 1983 after he picked up a woman on the side of the road and offered a ride home in a newspaper delivery vehicle. At some point, he started strangling her. She fortunately managed to fight him off and escape. When investigators discovered the case, they contacted Mr. Howell's family members who submitted DNA samples. The DNA samples indicated that the male DNA found on Cheryl's body was from their close relative. Investigators exhumed Howell's body and extracted a DNA sample from his jawbone, which matched the DNA found back in 1978. Joseph T. Dieters, who was the Hamilton County prosecutor, said that investigators met with Cheryl's family and told them that the man who took her life was no longer alive, but that they would present the evidence to a grand jury if the family wanted further closure. The family accepted the offer, and a Hamilton County grand jury indicted Ralph Howell. Joshua Dressler, a professor emeritus of law at Ohio State University's Michael E. Moritz College of Law, said that the indictment of a person known to not be alive anymore is exceptionally rare in the United States. First, it demonstrates to the family of the victims that the prosecutor treated the matter with seriousness. It is, at a minimum, a sense of justice for the family. Joseph Dieters said investigators believed that Mr. Howell might have taken the lives of at least 3 other women. Charmaine Stoya, 17, who was found in Hamilton County on March 12 of 1978. Nancy and Theobald, who was found in neighboring Butler County on December 26 of 1977. And Victoria Hincher, 24, who was found on October 31 of 1976, also in Butler County. All 3 of the women had been assaulted and strangled. If any of those cases get solved, I'll make another video going into more detail. A retired police officer said he thought that the case was never going to be solved. It was all a surprise. Everyone goes down the path of making their own ideas about what happened, and it was a complete surprise to me that it was a completely unknown person with no previous history to Cheryl apparently. For me, it helped finalizing it. Knowing that a person had been charged, whether he was alive or not, it really didn't matter to me. 22-year-old Akia Eggleston lived in Baltimore, Maryland in 2017. She had a daughter and was 8 months pregnant. The father was 36-year-old Michael Robertson, who also lived in Baltimore at the time. Akia was reported missing by her family members on May 7 of 2017 after she failed to show up to her own baby shower. It was determined that the last time anyone saw Akia alive was on the afternoon of May 3 of 2017, 4 days before she was reported missing. Investigators decided to create a timeline of events leading up to her disappearance, and also took a closer look at her unborn baby's father, Michael Robertson. Akia and Robertson first met in the 1990s when his grandmother babysat her as a child. They reconnected in 2016 and began dating. At the same time, Robertson was in a relationship with a 22-year-old woman. That woman had recently given birth to the couple's second child. Investigators learned that Akia was under the impression that she was going to move in with Robertson and was excited about it. Robertson sent her pictures of an apartment interior on May 2, 2017. Akia purchased 2 money orders totaling $450 after making several ATM withdrawals from her savings account. Moments later, Akia messaged Robertson on Facebook. "Called you. I got the money order." That afternoon, Akia unsuccessfully attempted to withdraw cash twice from an ATM at a Wells Fargo location downtown. Akia and Robertson were texting back and forth on May 3. That day, Akia was seen on surveillance video depositing the 2 money orders and a paycheck from her employer at a BB&T location in the Central Business District. Then she withdrew $450. Akia told a bank employee, whom she knew from high school, that she had to cash the orders because the property manager only takes cash. It is believed she was referring to the property that Robinson told her they are moving into. Robertson took a lift order by IKEA to the Cherry Hill neighborhood. Phone records indicate Robertson was in the area near IKEA's residence from 5:35 p.m. to 6:18 p.m. At about 5:22 p.m., IKEA sent a friend an invite to her baby shower on the following Sunday. It was her last known communication. Phone records show a telemarketer tried to call IKEA at 6:57 p.m. At that time, both her phone and Robertson's phone were located downtown. IKEA's phone activity ends there, indicating that the device was turned off or disabled. Using a reverse image search, Investigators determined the apartment picture Robertson had sent the day before was a completely different residence from the one he had named. Investigators learned of a volatile argument between Robertson and the mother of his children the night before Akia disappeared. When investigators looked at what could have sparked the argument, they saw that evening Akia shared a sonogram picture on Facebook. On the day of Akia's shower, family members said that they found her apartment nearly cleaned out. Police first thought that this was a clue that she walked off on her own. That was before they learned that Robertson made Akia believe that they were going to move in together, but notably has displayed a consistent pattern of hiding or avoiding police contact for weeks or months at a time between interviews. During an interview on June 15 of 2017, he claimed he saw Akia on Monday, May 1st, but we know that this is false because of the phone records. In July of 2017, a police spokesman said that investigators no longer believed that she walked off on her own, and had come to believe that there was foul play. After years of collecting all the telephone records, financial records, social media messages, and conducting multiple interviews, investigators had enough evidence to arrest Michael Robertson in connection to Akia's disappearance. Authorities arrested Robertson and charged him with taking Akia's life on February 1st of 2022. 2 days later, on February 3rd, Baltimore State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby held a press conference to announce the arrest of Robertson. Mosby said, "I give a special thanks to the family of Akia Eggleston for never giving up in their pursuit of justice for Akia and her unborn child." The state's attorney office released the full statement of probable cause in Akia's case. It reads as follows: based on her pattern of life, the time past extensive publicity and multiple searches and monetary rewards for information in this case, the document stated the fact that Akia has not returned to her family or been electronically or physically located overwhelmingly indicates that she is in fact deceased. The document details Akia's last days as revealed by interviews, financial records, telephone records, and social media communications, and alleges that the investigation revealed the only person with the motive, means, and opportunity to take Akia's life was the purported father of her unborn child, Michael Robertson. While Akia's body has not been found, the statement of probable cause revealed that in October of 2017, following the airing of a local television news report on Akia's case, Robertson's Google searches for "where does Baltimore City trash go when picked up" Baltimore City dumpster pickup and Baltimore City landfill indicate what may have happened to her remains. Michael Robertson is being held on bond in Michigan, where he currently resides. In its press release, the Baltimore State's Attorney's Office stated that Robertson faces a maximum penalty of 2 life sentences in prison if found guilty of all charges. Supervisor Special Agent Shane Buchwald with the FBI of Baltimore also spoke. For nearly 5 years, the people of Baltimore have searched, hoped, and mourned with Akia's family and friends, she said. But they never gave up, and neither did we. Buchenwald added that while Akia's body still hasn't been found, we hope this arrest brings a level of comfort and closure to Akia's family. Members of Akia's family also addressed the media. "Thank you to everyone for their thoughts and their prayers," Akia's aunt, Zenobia Wilson, said, "for keeping hope for our family that we would find her alive. Even though the evidence says something different, that she's not, we just want to say thank you and just to please continue to keep us in your prayers." Akia's stepfather, Sean Wilkinson, took to the podium to thank the investigation agencies who worked on Akia's case. He also brought attention to an issue that is all too common. "Domestic violence is real, and when it happens we need to address it," Wilkinson said. "The family seeks justice in Akia's case. It has affected so many relationships, and we will continue to stand united as a family until the final judgment in its case has been rendered." Early, one July morning in 2007, deputies with the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office arrived to a bloody scene at the Nature's Trail mobile home park in Thanatisasa, Florida. Jonathan Burns, who lived in and co-owned the park, had called 911 to report that he'd been stabbed during an altercation with a tenant. Deputies then found the body of 41-year-old Tonya and Ottman on the ground outside of her rented mobile home. There was a large laceration on her neck, and she had been stabbed 4 times in her chest. deputies found Tonya near her mobile home lying on the ground on her back. About 29 feet from her body, investigators found suspected blood near a trash bin, and blood leading back to the Burns home. Investigators found a bloody knife inside. Forensics tests at the time showed that the blood on the ground and the knife matched Burns' DNA profile. An autopsy concluded that Tonya lost her life from stab wounds to the chest that penetrated her heart and lungs. Burns, who was 43 years old at the time, had 2 wounds to his abdomen. He told investigators that Tonya had stabbed him. He was taken to Tampa General Hospital for surgery for 2 wounds to his mid-abdomen. Detectives also said both of his arms appeared to have scratches, with small lacerations on his fingers. When detectives learned that Tonya used a walker and a wheelchair, had a hard time getting around, and could be unsteady on her feet, they started to doubt that Burns acted in self-defense. The case was presented to the state attorney's office, which concluded there was insufficient evidence to refute Burns' version of the events. Then, in 2021, the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office Cold Case Unit started revisiting the case. On January 14th of 2022, a detective went back to Jonathan Burns' home in the park and interviewed him about the events surrounding Tonya's stabbing. Burns told the detectives he had been drinking heavily that night and Tonya started yelling at him while he walked to the laundry room to close it. He said he walked over to her mobile home and Tonya then punched him in the stomach. Burns said he later realized he was bleeding. He said Tonya was not armed with any type of weapon and never took his knife, but he thinks she stabbed him. More than a week after that interview, a witness contacted the sheriff's office saying she had information on a cold case from 2007. During an interview with a detective, the witness said that Burns had approached her in the mobile home park after the detective on January 14th, and he told her he knows he did something wrong and he wanted to face it. The witness said Burns told her he knew Tonya was disabled at the time. The witness also said Burns gave her a signed letter containing an account of what happened, which she passed on to the detective on January 25th of 2022. 2 days later, the witness contacted the detective again. This time, the witness said Burns had approached her and told her he wrote the letter as if he was acting in self-defense as he figured he would get less time. The witness said Burns told her that Tonya had gotten what she deserved and he did not feel bad about it. On January 28th, the witness gave the detective a second statement, written and signed by Burns, that contradicted the first statement. The witness and her son confronted Burns, telling him that there were contradictions between the letters and what he was telling her verbally. Burns then wrote a third statement that he handed to the witness and she gave it to the detective. In the third statement, Burns claimed he had stabbed himself in the stomach after the incident because that would be good for self-defense. He also claimed he saw Tonya while walking to the laundry room, so he returned home to get his knife before walking over to talk to her. Burns said an argument led to them fighting over the knife, and when Tonya tried to go home, he stabbed her several times and cut her throat. Burns ended the letter with an admission that he didn't like Tonya and intended to hurt her that night. "This was a terrible tragedy that I am responsible for," the statement said. "I wish I could change it." The details in the third statement are consistent with the evidence collected at the crime scene, and investigators matched a latent fingerprint on one of the statements to Burns. This led to 58-year-old Jonathan Burns being arrested by deputies at his home in the park that he still owns on February 2nd of 2022. A Tampa judge set his bond at $50,000 and he is currently awaiting trial. On September 9th of 1987, a woman's body was found in a parking lot in Fairfax County, Virginia. Her vehicle was later discovered nearby by detectives. It was abandoned along the Dulles Toll Road. It led investigators to believe that her life was taken after encountering car trouble or walking away from the vehicle. She was identified as 37-year-old Edgy Sober Adler. There's not really much information about her life. An autopsy concluded that Edgy suffered a skull fracture and cerebral hemorrhage. Detectives described the crime as brutal and cold-hearted. Despite investigators' best efforts, they could not identify the person responsible and the case went cold. In 2010 and 2017, a man by the name of Charles Hellam wrote to the Prince George's County police detectives, saying he had knowledge about certain cold cases. The first one he mentioned was the cold case of Jennifer Landry. Landry's life was taken in 2002 in Prince George's County, Maryland. After writing to detectives, Hellam decided to refuse to speak to them and give them any information. Hellam was behind bars serving a life sentence in Virginia. He took the life of his ex-girlfriend, Patricia Bentley. She was found strangled in her townhome in Chantilly, Virginia. Patricia was a school bus driver and had been a single mother to 2 sons. In 2021, investigators tried again to speak to Charles Hellam. This time, he agreed to have an interview. During that interview, Hellam verbally confessed to ending Jennifer Landry's life. He picked up 19-year-old Jennifer in Washington, D.C. and took her life in Mount Rainier a short time later. Hellam also mentioned a cold case from Fairfax County, Virginia. He said that he left a woman's body in a parking lot of a Days Inn in Herndon, Virginia. Investigators quickly realized he was referring to Edgy Sober Adler. Hellam gave details that only the perpetrator would know. This led to the following: to 52-year-old Charles Hellam being indicted in January of 2022. He is currently incarcerated at the Red Onion State Prison in Virginia. Fairfax County Police Chief Kevin Davis said, "We now know even more about the danger he presented to the entire National Capital Region. Sadly, both of Edgy's parents passed away never knowing what happened to their daughter. We hope this indictment brings some sense of closure to her surviving family members and friends." Davis also said that investigators are now trying to determine whether Hellam is involved in any other cold cases. Prince George's County Police Chief Malik Aziz said detectives didn't give up. "We all want our community to know that no matter how much time passes, we remain committed to finding answers for the families of crime victims. They deserve to know what happened to their loved ones." Authorities credited the tireless work of detectives and prosecutors over the years, with finally finding answers to the cold cases and continuing to pursue justice despite Hellam's current life sentence for taking Patricia Bentley's life. On April 29th of 2009, a baby's body was found inside a trash bag on the side of a road near the town of Teresa, Wisconsin. Officers were able to gather genetic evidence from the newborn, as well as the bag and its other contents. Some of the DNA discovered was determined to belong to a close female relative that investigators assumed was from the child's mother. The baby was white and female. A county medical examiner performed an autopsy on the body 2 days later and determined the baby passed away prior to or during birth. At the time, investigators working on identifying anyone related to the baby named her baby Teresa, after the community closest to where she was found. After authorities were unable to find anyone related to baby Teresa, she was laid to rest on May 11th of 2009. While no family was present at her burial, community members showed up to the Lowell Cemetery in southwest Dodge County to pay their respects. Todd Michael and his staff at the Cornerstone Funeral Home donated the funds for the funeral service. The sheriff's office chaplain, Timothy Bauer, conducted the service. In 2014, authorities filed a charge against the unknown mother's DNA profile and to prevent a 6-year-old statute of limitations for the charges to run out, effectively allowing them to prosecute the mother when they finally identify her. As DNA technology advanced in recent years, investigators were finally able to identify baby Teresa's parents in 2021. The mother is 45-year-old Corinne Lieutenant. Investigators spoke with her in March of 2021. Lieutenant claimed that she didn't realize she was pregnant until she was months into her term. She said that she was in denial when she gave birth to the baby at home. She told investigators the child's umbilical cord was wrapped around its neck when it was born, so she put the newborn's body in a garbage bag and drove aimlessly on what was then U.S. Highway 41. Lieutenant then left the bag with the baby's body in a wooded area she had found next to the road. During her pregnancy, Lieutenant admitted she continued smoking a pack of cigarettes a day and drinking 6 to 8 beers daily. She didn't hear about baby Teresa until 5 years later, she claimed. The infant's biological father claims he had no idea Lieutenant was even pregnant. The man confirmed he had been in a relationship with Lieutenant since 2002. Karen Lieutenant was then arrested on March of 2021. Following the arrest, her lawyer, Anik Ahmad, had this to say. As the district attorney explained, this case involves a stillborn child, which is always a tragedy for the parents involved. Further facts about the case will come to light over the course of the legal process. Due to the ethical rules that govern attorney's statement while an active case is pending, I am limited in what I can say on behalf of Miss Lieutenant. As every person is presumed innocent under the law, I would ask that the community respect Miss Lieutenant's privacy in the meantime. In April of 2022, Lieutenant pled guilty to one count of concealing the death of her child. During the trial, it was confirmed that Lieutenant never asked for medical help before or after the baby was delivered, and there were no medical records of Lieutenant being pregnant. She told investigators she blacked out for about 15 minutes after the birth and never heard the baby cry and never saw it move. A sentencing hearing was then set up for August 5th of 2022. She faced up to 3.5 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. Then, in September of 2022, Lieutenant was sentenced to 6 months in jail and 3 years of probation. The court stated a sentence of 1.5 years in prison and 2 years of probation, which will only be served if Lieutenant does not successfully complete probation. As a part of her probation, Lieutenant was also ordered to pay a $5,000 fine, complete 60 hours of community service, and undergo mental health treatment. 31-year-old Linda Slayton lived in Lakeland, Florida. She had 2 sons, 12-year-old Tim and 15-year-old Jeff. On the morning of September 4th of 1981, Linda's sister Judy Butler had gone to their home so the two could have coffee. But when she arrived, Judy found her sister's body and quickly called 911. Linda was laying on the bed with a wire hanger wrapped around her neck. She had been assaulted and strangled. Investigators who arrived at the scene had to break the news to her 2 sons. They found Jeff sleeping in the living room and told him to put on some clothes and go outside. Once outside, Jeff saw what looked like every cop in the state of Florida, news crews, and his Aunt Judy was out there crying. Judy then told him what had happened to Linda. In the second bedroom, an officer woke up Linda's other son, Tim. Still in his pajamas, Tim walked past his mother's closed bedroom door. The door then swung open as an officer left the room. He then saw the whole crime scene. Investigators believed that the perpetrator entered Linda's bedroom window as the screen had been removed. They also found a palm print on the windowsill. Furthermore, they were able to collect DNA belonging to an unknown man from her body. Investigators then tried to learn more about Linda to try to find if the person responsible was someone close to her. They looked at Linda's ex-husband, Frank Slayton. She divorced him in 1974 when she was 24 years old. He was a violent alcoholic and would turn abusive and hit Linda. Even though he was an asshole, investigators could not link him to the crime. Another person investigators looked at was Jeff Slayton. They interviewed him a few times but could not prove that he was responsible either. Investigators also looked into Joe Mills. 20-year-old Mills was Tim's football coach at school. After getting divorced, Linda struggled for work, made her own clothes to save money, and could not afford a car. Mills then drove Tim to and from practice every day. Investigators could not link Mills to the crime scene either. Sergeant Edgar Pickett worked at the Lakeland Police Department as a fingerprint expert. He scoured the entire crime scene and was the one that found the palm print on the windowsill. The palm print and the DNA taken from Linda's body was stored, so it could be used at a later date. Jeff and Tim moved in with their grandparents, Clarence and Margaret Harris. They were terrified and almost never left the house. They all slept in the same room except Grandpa Harris. He would stand guard with a gun all night while they slept. The grandparents hoped a quick return to familiar routines would help their distraught grandsons. A few weeks after their mom's funeral, the boys were back in school. They decided to focus on football. This is a photo of Tim's football team, taken a month after Linda's life was taken. Tim hung the photo in his bedroom. He said it reminded him of something his mom taught him, to keep moving forward and never giving up. In recent years, Jeff and Tim stated that there is still grief and guilt for not hearing anything that night, for not coming to their mom's rescue. In March of 1999, investigators had developed a full DNA profile of the person that took Linda's life. All they needed was a match. Detective Brad Grice took over the case in 2001. He took dozens of DNA samples from prior persons of interest, submitting them to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement for comparison. Detective Grice then met with Jeff and Tim. He took DNA samples from the brothers to clear them again. He also promised them that he would not retire until he solved their mother's case. Also volunteered to sample, but none matched. Then, in September 2001, Detective Grice got a tip. Nearly a year after Linda's life was taken, a 24-year-old man named Jimmy Ulmer pulled a 10-year-old girl through her bedroom window and nearly took her life. Ulmer was convicted of that and sentenced to 80 years in prison. The savage assault seemed eerily similar to Linda's case. Furthermore, Detective Grice discovered that around the time Linda's life was ended, Jimmy Ulmer had been staying with a friend who happened to live in the very same apartment complex as Linda. Detective Grice, along with Jeff and Tim, felt confident that they had their man. Ulmer passed away in prison in 1996, but Grice got a DNA sample from his mother. When his DNA did not match the DNA from the crime scene, it was a massive disappointment. Felt like they were back to square one. By 2005, Detective Grice was headed up to a new cold case unit and got the FBI to run the DNA profile continuously through all federal databanks. But the years continued to pass without a match. In 2015, Detective Grice had medical problems which forced him to retire, meaning he unfortunately couldn't keep his promise. All hope was not lost, however, as in 2018, groundbreaking DNA technology began to electrify the law enforcement community. Genetic genealogist Cece Moore decided to take on Linda's case. She is a renowned expert in the field of investigative genetic genealogy. Cece has been responsible for solving so many cold cases, many of which have been covered on this channel. Moore uploaded the DNA profile to a public genealogy website called GeneMatch. She then meticulously constructed branch by branch the culprit's family tree. She made these connections by poring over birth certificates, marriage license, obituaries, and social media to fill in the family tree with names. Moore explained that she uncovered 3 branches of the perpetrator's family tree that ultimately narrowed to the one person most likely responsible. She said that the 3 genetic networks converged into one family tree that pointed at one immediate family. The man was the only son in that family, so it had to be him that was the DNA contributor. After dozens of suspects were investigated and cleared, Cece Moore identified the man in one weekend. The man is Joseph Clinton Mills, Coach Joe, who drove Tim to and from practice. Authorities wanted to be certain before they notified the brothers. Cece Moore's final 2019 report confirmed that Joseph Mills, then 58, was living in about a half an hour from the crime scene. Detectives Tammy Hathcock and Russell Hurley were the next generation of Lakeland investigators who worked on Linda's case. The detectives then combed over the original case files and learned that Mills was interviewed initially but just briefly. Mills told them that he dropped him off at his house and that he did not know what happened to Linda. Detectives found that Mills was convicted in 1984 of grand theft for forging a will. He never went to jail, but he was fingerprinted and had a palm print taken as well. In August of 2019, investigators compared those prints to the palm print Sergeant Pickett lifted off Linda's windowsill nearly 38 years before. It was a match. High-tech genetic genealogy had identified Mills as the likely culprit, and an old-fashioned palm print helped confirm his identity. Detective Hathcock and Hurley still needed to compare a fresh DNA sample from Mills to the decades-old DNA recovered from the crime scene. They covertly took Mills' trash back to the police department. They discovered a piece of used medical adhesive tape and sent it off to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement Crime Lab for testing. 11 days later, the tests came back and it was confirmed that Joseph Mills took the life of Linda Slayton. Only then could her sons Jeff and Tim be informed that the monster had finally been caught. Tim said he had looked up to Coach Joe and was now sickened that he had this photo of him all these years. Even more sickening was that Mills continued driving Tim to and from practice after he took Linda's life. On December 12th of 2019, detectives arrested Joseph Mills. Here is a picture of Detective Tammy Hathcock reading him his rights. He showed no emotion and didn't ask why he was being arrested, almost as if he already knew. Tim and Jeff went to meet Sergeant Edgar Pickett, now 94 years old, to personally thank him for collecting the palm print all those years back. In 2022, Mills pled guilty to all charges. At his sentencing, Linda's family wanted to know why. Jeff yelled at him in court, "Why? I just want to know why, Joe. Why'd you take my mama from me? I loved my mama. We was happy." Mills' response infuriated everyone. "I am a good person. I'm not that person that they're painting me out to be." Finally, in February of 2022, Mills was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. C.C. Moore said, "We owe a huge debt of gratitude to those original crime scene investigators. Because at the time this crime was committed, they didn't even know DNA was going to be used in criminal investigations. And so the fact they collected that and then it was stored responsibly and carefully all these years by that department is so important. If that hadn't happened, we couldn't have done our work." Jeff and Tim say they're determined to move on the best they can to live life well for their mom and for their families. The brothers also know they never would have survived their ordeal without each other. They remain extremely close, live just a few miles apart, and share passionate hobbies like restoring cars. Jeff and Tim visit their mom's grave together often and burn a candle next to a portrait of her every anniversary. On June 1st of 2018, an off-duty firefighter spotted the body of an infant floating 100 feet off the Boynton Beach Inlet in Florida. The firefighter initially mistook the female baby for a doll. Investigators searched records of every child born in Palm Beach and Broward counties, but were unable to find any information to help the case. Investigators released an image rendered by artists of how the baby might have looked at birth, in the hope that someone may come forward with a lead. A $10,000 reward was offered for any information leading to an arrest in the case, but none of the tips police received were helpful. Having been found that month, the infant was named Baby June by investigators. With them unable to identify her, the case was handed over to the Cold Case Squad. Recently, in 2022, the crime lab and cold case team were able to eventually identify the father of the baby girl through a DNA match. Julie Sikorsky, supervisor of the office's forensic biology unit, said the sheriff's office uploaded the newborn's DNA onto a public database, Family Tree DNA. They were able to find a close relative. After identifying the father, investigators tracked him down and interviewed him. He said that he had a girlfriend at the time that the baby was found. She had told him she was pregnant, but that she had taken care of it. He claimed he knew nothing about the baby and believed she had an abortion. Detectives were able to get their hands on a covert DNA sample of the father's former girlfriend, a piece of garbage she had discarded. They were then able to use this to confirm that she was the mother of the newborn baby. She is 29-year-old Arya Singh. Police learned that Singh had been at the inlet on May 30th of 2018, 48 hours before the baby was found in the water nearby. They also found that she had searched for and read news articles about the baby's discovery. When questioned, Singh told investigators she did not know she was pregnant until she gave birth on May 30th of 2018 and that she was not sure if the baby was alive or not at the time. After interviewing Singh, as well as several of her friends and family members, they determined that she was solely responsible for the baby ending up in the Boynton Beach Inlet. On December 15th of 2022, the Palm Beach County Police announced that they arrested Arya Singh. Palm Beach County Sheriff Rick Bradshaw told the news conference, "It's a whole new world as far as technology is concerned. We had a lot of people at the beginning say, 'You got nothing. You'll be lucky if you ever find anybody in this.' Bradshaw praised his officers, saying that while they are tough, this particular case had taken an emotional toll on them all. The men and women of law enforcement always think they are tough and that they have seen it all. But I guarantee you, when you see a newborn infant floating in the ocean like somebody had discarded it like a piece of trash, it tugs at your heart, he said. 60-year-old Betty Rolfe lived in Appleton, Wisconsin in 1988. She was described as a loving mother and grandmother who always cared about people. She was an avid baker and her homemade bread, rolls, pies, and noodles were the envy of the neighborhood. At about 6 a.m. on November 6th of 1988, amidst a raging blizzard, Betty made the trek to her job at the Country Air Banquet Hall. She never made it there. Betty's lifeless body was found the next morning near a railroad underpass just outside of Appleton city limits. She had been assaulted, badly beaten, and strangled. Investigators were able to collect DNA from her body. In 2001, the DNA was used to rule out any of her family members as suspects. Unfortunately, the technology was not advanced enough to identify the person that was responsible, and the case went cold. In 2019, investigators used the DNA evidence collected back in 1988 to search for possible relatives of the suspect. More recently, investigators were able to narrow down their search to two brothers. The one brother cooperated with authorities and gave them his DNA sample. After some testing, he was ruled out. The other brother is Gene Meyer. Investigators obtained a DNA sample from the handle of Meyer's truck, which matched with the DNA evidence from 1988. On December 7th of 2022, 66-year-old Gene Meyer of Eatonville, Washington, was arrested and charged with taking Betty Rolfe's life. Meyer was a former resident of Valdez, Wisconsin. He moved to Washington after the slaying and is being held at the Pierce County Jail in Tacoma. He is awaiting extradition to Wisconsin. Betty's granddaughter, Sue Strenka, said that she and her family are in shock following Meyer's arrest. We didn't know if this person was deceased or if this person had other crimes. We just didn't know. 23-year-old Mary Robin Walter lived in Great Bend, Kansas in 1980. She is a wife, mother, and nursing school student. On January 24th of 1980, police were called to Nelson Trailer Park near the airport in Great Bend about a shooting. When they arrived there, they found Mary's body. She had been shot multiple times. Investigators collected evidence and interviewed several people, but obtained no useful information and the case went cold. In April 2022, Detective Sergeant Adam Hales reopened the investigation. After taking a fresh look at the case, it became evident to him that some of the information had been initially overlooked. In October of 2022, new evidence was discovered, but authorities declined to disclose it. On December 8th of 2022, 68-year-old Stephen Hanks of Burton, Kansas was arrested in connection with the case. Barton County Sheriff Brian Bellendier announced the arrest at a news conference. At 42 years and 10 months, we believe this is the oldest homicide arrest in the state of Kansas, Bellendier said. Bellendier said Stephen Hanks was investigated as a suspect immediately after the shooting, but the case went cold. He did not disclose a possible motive. I'm proud of my officers for clearing this case. Hopefully it brings closure for the family and brings justice for the community, Bellendier said. These are long, complicated investigations and are tedious. The credit here goes to my people. Stephen Hanks spent time in prison for another crime. He was arrested in 1981 and charged with assault, battery, robbery, and burglary. He was sentenced in 1983 and discharged in 1993. In response to the break in the case, Mary Robin Walter's niece, Leslie Scraig, issued a statement on behalf of the family saying in part, "We are grateful for the detectives' efforts bringing this man to justice. Robin was truly beautiful inside and out," Scraig said. "This world was robbed of her presence and we will never know how that has shaped our lives. The news is bittersweet. Many of those who knew Robin are gone. Her parents, husband, and a sister will not get to share in our collective relief that Robin's case will have a conclusion." 19-year-old Jennifer Brinkman lived in Marysville, Washington in 1998 with her father and his girlfriend. Jennifer was described as a social individual who actively sought companionship and people. On March 21st of 1998, Jennifer's father and his girlfriend returned home from a vacation in California. They made a gruesome discovery. In Jennifer's bedroom, they found her body. She had been struck in the neck by an axe. The axe was still at the crime scene. Investigators found DNA on the weapon, but limited DNA technology prevented them from finding a match. Looking at Jennifer's electronics, they found that she was active on telephone chat lines and dating sites, trying to meet men. Investigators tracked a few of those men down and interviewed them, but were unable to prove any of them were responsible, and the case went cold. In 2020, detectives decided to take another look at the cold case since a lot of advances were made in DNA technology over the years. Parabon Nanolabs then got involved and created a DNA profile using the DNA found on the axe. Using genetic genealogy, they were then able to build a family tree of the suspect and finally identify him. On November 28 of 2022, 52-year-old Jeffrey Paul Primo was arrested and charged with taking Jennifer Brinkman's life by the Marysville Police Department. He was taken to the Snohomish County Jail on a $250,000 bail. The Washington State Patrol Crime Lab said that Primo's genetic material matched the DNA found on the axe. Police Chief Eric Scarpon said in a statement, "Solving this case has been at the top of the priority list of the Marysville Police Department for the past 24-plus years. We never gave up or put this on a shelf. It was continuously being investigated with the belief that we would one day be able to bring some level of closure for the family and justice for Jennifer." It was also revealed that Jennifer met Primo on a phone chat line. Primo was one of the men early investigators looked into when they found a letter he had written to Jennifer. Detective Wade Rediger said the letter was cordial in nature, but there were strong indications there had been meetings prior based on the verbiage of the letter. They talked about some personal matters both on Jennifer's part and on the suspect's part. Despite the letter indicating that the pair had met, Primo denied ever knowing her in his interview with the police. After he was arrested, Primo invoked his constitutional rights and refused to speak. This leaves us without a known motive for the crime. Commander Rob Lamoureux was the first detective at the crime scene back in 1998, and he still leads investigations with the Marysville Police Department to this day. This is what he said about the case. "It's one of those things where it never leaves your thought process because it continues to be unsolved. It wasn't until yesterday, when we made the arrest and I was sitting at home thinking about it, that it really hit that we've got a conclusion to this and we're finally able to put it on a shelf and have some closure not only for us as investigators who have been involved, but the family and the community," he continued. While Jennifer's father passed away in 2013, police were able to tell her mother about the breakthrough in the case. "She was extremely emotional," Lamoureux said. "I think it was an overwhelming emotion for her to finally have an answer." On November 6 of 1980, a body was found burning near I-80 in Wolf Creek Township. After an autopsy, the body could not be identified due to third-degree burns on 70% of his body. But it was determined it was a 16 to 19-year-old man, 115 pounds, 5 foot, 8 inches tall. Advancements in technology and funding helped further the investigation in 2007. When a DNA profile was obtained from the victim through evidence collected at the 1980 autopsy. Then, in January of 2019, the victim's DNA was sent to a lab for genetic genealogy screening. A cousin of the victim was identified. Finally, they were able to identify the victim as Edwin Rodriguez, a native of Chicago. Further investigation determined that Nestor Quintanil was the one responsible for taking the life of Edwin. Quintanil was a family friend, and the two left Chicago for Florida in the fall of 1980. After they left, Edwin's family never heard from him again. Mercer County District Attorney Peter Acker reviewed the case and said charges would have been filed, but Quintanil passed away in Florida in 2002 at the age of 71. Edwin's remains were returned to his family in Chicago, officially closing the case. Unfortunately, with Quintanil not being alive anymore, Edwin's family will forever have unanswered questions.